The second story of today's video is so horrific that you might have to rewatch it just to get a grasp of why they did it. But before we begin, if you like true crime stories and just scary stories in general, then I'd highly suggest you hit that subscribe button, as I upload once a week. But with all that being said, let's begin. Today's first story is going to start off with a mother named Janice. Janice was doing her makeup and was getting ready to go out with her friends. But at the same time, Janice's daughter, who she deemed as her prized possession, was also getting ready to go out with her friend. Janice's daughter was called Stacy McCall, and Stacy's friend was called Susie Streeter. And you see, the two girls were getting ready for their graduation party because both of them had just graduated from their high schools in Springfield. Their celebrations would take place in different parties, so McCall asked her mother that could she stay at a hotel instead of coming back home, and which the mother said okay, but she was a bit wary that maybe it's better to come back home instead of staying at a hotel. But she knew that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and you don't get to do this often. So instead of saying that, she just decided to let them free. So all the girls get ready and they leave at the same time, but obviously they go their separate ways. So Susie and McCall would have their fun, and eventually they would come to the hotel, which then McCall would call her mother, who also came back from her reunion. And McCall and her mother would have a conversation about how their day went. But before they were about to end the call, McCall told her mother that we're going to a water park with a group of friends, if that's okay with you. And once again, the mother was a bit concerned, but again she said the same thing, which was go ahead, but make sure you call me before you leave and after you come back. So again, McCall was excited and said thank you to her mother, and she would promise her that she would call her after and before she left. So the two women would continue their conversation before they ended the call. But for some reason, either them taking too long to get ready or their friends taking too long to get ready, they decided that they would go the next morning, because now it was getting a bit too late and it was 10:30 p.m. So instead of going to this water park like planned, Susie and McCall would decide that let's go to our friend's house, who was named Janelle Kirby, and see if she would let us stay. But before going on this detour, McCall would call her mother once again and tell them what's going on and where they were going. And Janice would calmly say, oh, that's fine, just make sure that you don't get into trouble. And the two women would also small talk for a bit before they both ended the call again. And unfortunately, this would be the last time that Janice would communicate with her daughter. From this point onwards, this is what investigators think that Susie and McCall did before they disappeared. McCall and Susie would head to Janelle's house, and they quickly found out that there's a party being held there. So they go up to the door and they knock on it, and then Janelle answers. So they asked Janelle that could we stay at your house, which she said yes to. So they would enter the house and automatically see loads of people in the house, and just music blaring from everywhere. And around 2 a.m. was when the party actually died down and everyone was going home. But the house was still crowded due to visiting family members for them to even consider staying over. So instead of staying at Janelle's house, the two girls decided that let's just stay at Susie's house. So the girls told Janelle that we're going to Susie's house instead, and that in the morning they would still go to this water park together. So the three women would say goodbye to each other, and then Susie and McCall would head to Susie's house. Once at Susie's house, they would knock on the door, and they were greeted by Susie's mother, who was named Cheryl Levitt. She was a 47-year-old single mother that had moved into this house a year prior. She also had a son named Bot, but over the years their relationship would become more distant, to the point where they don't even really speak to each other that much. So the two girls went inside, and the first thing that they did was just crash into bed because they were exhausted. So the next day came and Janelle was ready to go to this water park, but she realized that Susie and McCall aren't here yet. She thought that was strange, and so she just waited and waited until 30 minutes would go by and there was no sight of Susie or McCall. And in this period, Janelle was just constantly calling and texting the two girls, and still no replies or answers. And at this point, Janelle was getting worried that maybe the girls had slept in. And now an hours went by and Janelle's like, you know what, I'm going to Susie's house to see what they're doing. So Janelle and her boyfriend Mike, who was also meant to go on this trip with the girls, went to Susie's house, and right away they noticed that something's not right. They parked outside Susie's house and they noticed that the front porch light was broken and glass was all over the floor. To be more specific, not the bulb inside was broken, it was the glass around it. They didn't think too much of it, and Mike just swiped the glass off the porch. Also, when the couple were walking up to the house, they noticed that the three cars that belonged to the women, notably Susie's car, which she usually parked in a specific area, but this time when they were walking up, it wasn't there. It was parked in a different location, which they found strange as well. So now they're at the door and they began knocking on the door, hoping to get an answer, which they didn't. And then for some reason they tried the doorknob and the door was unlocked. As the door slowly opened, the only thing that they could hear is the eerie sound of the door creaking. They began to explore the house and quickly realized that no one was home. And this is when they assumed that Susie and McCall had already left for the water park. So the couple looked at each other and decided that let's go to the water park and hope that those two were there. However, as they were about to leave, Janelle's phone rang. Janelle picked the phone up and was greeted by an unfamiliar male voice, saying strange things, and Janelle tried her best to listen to what he was saying, but she couldn't understand it, and just as abruptly they ended the call as well. Even though this was strange, Janelle got used to this, as she had been getting prank calls recently, so instead of being worried, she was a bit more nonchalant. But after this call, Mike and Janelle just left for the water park. A couple of hours later, the couple were reached to the water park, and the first thing that they began to do was search for the two girls, and again they couldn't find them, so they decided that let's just stay next to our car and see if they rock up late. And not long after, Janice, aka McCall's mother, would rock up, because remember, she was expecting a call from her daughter, but she didn't receive it, so she got worried and decided that I'm going to head to the water park, because it was very strange for McCall not to call her mother when she was instructed by her mother to do so. So she went to the water park expecting the girls to be there, but instead she saw Janelle with her boyfriend and no sign of the two girls. And now this is where the mother began to panic a bit more, but they would all wait and hope for the girls to show up, but time would go by and there would be still no signs of these girls. So they quickly went back home and they decided that we need to go to Susie's house, because that was the last known location of the girls. So quickly Janelle went back home and dropped her stuff at her house, and her and her boyfriend and McCall's mother went to Susie's house. And now with more investigation, they bizarrely found 3 of the women's purses lined up on Susie's bedroom floor. They also found Cheryl's dog, Cinnamon. He was acting frantic. They looked around the house and nothing was stolen, and there was no sign of forced entry, so they didn't really know what to do and what to think. But until Janelle discovered a message that had been left on the answer machine in their absence. When she listened to the message, she noticed that it was the same male voice from before, and now this time making crude remarks. But unfortunately, she accidentally deleted the message. And now finally, with all this going on, they decided that they need to call the police. While waiting for them, Janelle made a questionable decision by cleaning the house, thus contaminating a probable crime scene. The police department quickly showed up and quickly declared the 3 women missing. The case got so big even the FBI showed up, and during the first 2 weeks investigators launched multiple search parties, and along with more than 20,000 missing people posters. Some of those posters still remain in storefronts in Springfield, and if you go there today you can definitely see them, but even with them up, there's still no sign of these women. Gentlemen, this is a robbery. Those were the words that were said on March 18th, 1990 by 2 men cleverly dressed in stolen police uniform after they deceived 2 young security guards at the Isabella Stewart Gardening Museum in Boston. These men were going to rob a famous museum that was known for its expensive paintings. These paintings are prestigious and worth a lot of money, but just how they did it was truly baffling. So the men get to the museum and carefully knock on the door, which the guard opens a peephole and asks them, "Why are you here?" Which the 2 men say that they were here responding to a disturbance call outside this museum and just wanted to check everything was good inside the museum. So even though the guards were skeptical of these men, they let them in anyways. So now the men, still dressed up in their police uniform, began to discreetly turn off the cameras inside the museum, as the guards that were guarding the museum weren't really paying attention to these men, because the guards' attention was shifted to what was going outside of the museum. So just to give you a quick picture, the 2 guards are in front of the men, but as the guards were walking behind the men, suddenly the 2 men grabbed the guards and gagged them up and then restricted the hands and the legs. So this is when the guards knew that these police officers weren't actually police officers, these were robbers. So now the 2 guards are sitting on the floor watching the 2 men diligently walk around to see if all the cameras were turned off, and one of the robbers looked at the guards straight dead in the eye and said, "If you want to live, you better not tell anybody." Once he said that, the 2 robbers began to head deeper into the museum, where they began to steal loads of valuable paintings. But strangely, they didn't steal one of the most expensive paintings, called the Europa. Instead of stealing the painting, they decided to put Titan oil all over it. But even though the robbers thought that they were undetected, they missed out on a cruel detail. But before we continue with today's story, if you've enjoyed these stories, then I highly suggest you subscribe to my channel, as I do this once a week. But with all that being said, let's continue. You see, even though museums have loads of cameras, that's not the only way of protection that they have. They also have motion sensors. From painting holders to the doors that people open, there's motion sensors everywhere. All that movement that they were doing in the museum was being documented by the motion sensors. And in this documentation, it was revealed that the robbers did not venture into the first floor of the gallery, leading the police to believe that one of the actual guards were in this heist and was a part of these robbers. But even with all this information, the police didn't know who these robbers were, and if the fact that the guards were in this plan. And decades later, that still remains. Although the FBI insists that they knew who the perpetrator is, the FBI believe that the mafia family in New England and Philadelphia were in on this. But even though the FBI insists on this, they still haven't released the identities of these 2 men that casually did one of the biggest heists in history. At around 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947, Betty Bersinger was pushing her daughter in a stroller through Lamette Park, which was a section of South Los Angeles, when she noticed something off the weedy vacant lots of the sidewalk. She looked closely and she noticed that it was a naked corpse, and she could see from the waist down of this corpse the body was severed. The corpse had pale white skin and jet black hair, and when Betty got even closer to the body, she could see that the face of whoever this person was had a massive slash on it, also a massive slash from one mouth to the other. Betty, in a panic, went to one of the neighbouring houses and made them call 911. So the police arrived at this horrific yet hidden crime scene, and they took that body to an autopsy, and it turned out that this body belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Shorts. The discovery of Elizabeth Shorts' body ignited a frenzy that just baffled the LAPD, because which evil person would place a dead person in the middle of an open area for people to look at? And not to mention what horrible things that they did to this person. So the police really needed to find out who did this, and so this would be one of the most infamous unsolved cases, named the Black Dahlia. And a couple of months later, another body was found, and the body was in the same conditions as Shorts' body. It was another woman that was left out in a not too hidden part of LA, and once again the corpse's waist was severed. But digging through more investigation, they kind of had an idea what happened to Elizabeth before she got murdered. Here's what the police think happened. The police believe that Elizabeth went out to a party and had a few drinks before the party ultimately died down, and instead of going home, she decided to continue her late night partying. And once she was done, she decided to go home, where she lived with his wealthy family, and that family consisted of a man named Robert and his pregnant wife. And you see, Elizabeth had fallen for Robert and would try to flirt with him all the time, but Robert, being a good husband, would decline Elizabeth and would keep their relationship as friends. You see, Elizabeth would do housework for rich people, and that was her way of making money. And at the time working with Robert's family, she was going through a bit of a rough patch, and she needed a place to stay, which then Robert generously let her stay with them. And a little time would pass, and Elizabeth would finally muster enough money to go and actually live by herself, and so that's what she did. She booked herself a hotel for her to stay at, but before she was about to leave, she asked Robert if he could drop her off at this hotel, which obviously Robert said yes. So Robert drove her to the hotel and dropped her stuff at the hotel, and as he was about to leave, Elizabeth pleaded with Robert, asking him to stay with her for a bit longer so she doesn't have to stay alone, and he wouldn't have to stay long because her sister was coming to pick her up at 6:30. And when she said this, Robert knew that this was a bad idea, and he also had an appointment really early in the morning, so he politely declined the offer. But instead of leaving straight away, Robert said he would stay with her for a bit, but he really needed to go. So that's what he did. He stayed with her until he needed to go. So the two said goodbye, and Robert would be on his way back home. And then as soon as Robert left, Elizabeth would call the front staff and ask for a favor, which was unknown. And it also turned out that those staff were the last people to see her alive. She went missing for 6 days, and her body was found in the morning. And even though the police tried their best to figure out who the killer was, till this day they still don't know who killed her. So that'll be it for today's video. If you've enjoyed today's video, then I'd highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as I upload these videos once a week. And also comment down below which one was your favourite story. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.